Brooklyn had exactly three thoughts when the sky split open above Ironwood High School on that perfectly mundane Monday afternoon. One, she'd left her chemistry homework in her locker, and Dr. Pemberton was absolutely going to fail her. Two, that weird humming sound wasn't coming from the ancient HVAC system like she'd assumed. Three, oh God, those were spaceships, and they were shooting at her school. Not the most profound series of realizations, but then again, nobody ever accused Brooklyn of being philosophical under pressure. Quick? Sure. Athletic? Definitely. Track team captain 3 years running. But philosophical? That required sitting still, and sitting still had never been her strong suit. Brooke? Holland's voice cracked beside her, his usual tech-obsessed confidence evaporating faster than water on hot pavement. Are those? Yep. Brooklyn grabbed his arm, already moving toward the stairwell. Around them, students froze like deer in headlights, phones out, filming the impossible. Because, of course, they were. Humanity's first response to the apocalypse. Make sure it's documented for social media. Shouldn't we? The north wall exploded. Not metaphorically. Not partially. The entire section of brick and mortar that separated Mr. Henderson's history classroom from the parking lot just ceased to exist in a spray of superheated debris and blue-white energy that looked like lightning having a seizure. Brooklyn didn't think. Thinking took time, and time had just become a luxury none of them could afford. She ran. Not away from the explosion. Away would have been smart, would have been sensible, would have been what literally every survival instinct in her body was screaming at her to do. No, Brooklyn ran toward the history wing, where screaming had replaced the usual drone of Henderson's lectures about the Industrial Revolution. Holland shouted something behind her, probably something intelligent and logical. But she was already gone, legs pumping, that familiar burn of exertion kicking in like an old friend. Smoke choked the hallway, thick and black and wrong-smelling, not like burning wood or paper, but something chemical and alien that made her eyes water. Through the haze, she could make out shapes, bodies. Students crumpled against lockers, some moving, some not. And that distinction was the only thing that mattered. Move! She hauled Xavier up by his Letterman jacket, the big linebacker looking dazed and small for the first time since she'd known him. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. Exits that way? Go! Go! He stumbled off, and she was already moving to the next person. Lila, one half of the Morrison twins, pinned under a section of ceiling tile. Brooklyn grabbed the debris, ignored the way it burned her palms, and lifted. Can you walk? Lila nodded, tears streaming down her face. Kyle, my brother. I'll find him. Move! More ships overhead now, their shadows crossing the gaping holes in the building like predatory birds. Weapons fire streaked down in pulses of energy that turned concrete to molten slag. Somewhere, alarms were wailing, but they sounded distant and useless. What were alarms going to do against an alien invasion? Ask them politely to stop? Brooklyn found Kyle in what used to be the chemistry lab, appropriately enough. He was conscious, but trapped behind an overturned table that had probably saved his life when the windows blew in. She could see his reflection in the shattered glass scattered across the floor. A dozen fragmented versions of fear. Hey, Morrison. She kept her voice steady, casual, like they were just hanging out between classes. Ready to skip the rest of school? There's Brooklyn. Those are aliens. Yep, and they have terrible timing. Midterms are next week. She shoved the table aside with strength she didn't know she had. Adrenaline doing wonderful things to her muscle capacity. Come on your feet. He clutched her arm as they navigated back toward the stairwell, and Brooklyn did a quick mental count. Xavier, Lila, Kyle, that freshman whose name she could never remember, the exchange student, Dmitri. Maybe 10 people so far? 15? Not enough. Nowhere near enough. The building groaned around them, a sound like a dying animal, and Brooklyn's track-trained mind automatically calculated distances, trajectories, escape routes. The main stairwell was compromised. She could see flames licking up from the lower floor. The east exit was buried under rubble. That left the science wing, which meant going deeper into the building, not out of it. Great plan, Brooklyn. Truly inspired. Holland appeared from the smoke like a ghost, his shirt torn and his glasses cracked, but his expression determined. I told the ones who can walk to get to the athletic field. Emergency shuttles are landing there. How many made it out? Maybe half? Brooklyn, we need to. Another explosion, closer this time, and the floor beneath them buckled. Brooklyn grabbed Holland and pulled them both against the wall as a section of ceiling collapsed exactly where they'd been standing. Dust clouded everything, got in her mouth, her nose, made breathing feel like swallowing sandpaper. Okay, she coughed. Okay, new plan. Science wing, out through the lab emergency exits, circle around to the field. The science wing is on fire. Only mostly on fire. Totally different situation. Holland stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Maybe that's what happened when your Monday went from worrying about chemistry homework to dodging alien weapons fire. Sanity became optional. They found more students huddled in the language hallway, a cluster of underclassmen too terrified to move. Brooklyn recognized a few from track. Kids she'd trained with, encouraged, pushed to run faster. Now she needed them to run for their lives. Listen up! Her voice cut through their panic, sharp and authoritative in a way that surprised even her. We're leaving, right now, and we're all leaving together. Understood? Blank stares. Shock did that, froze people, made them passengers in their own bodies. I said, understood? That got through. Nods, shaky but present. Good. Holland leads, I take rear. Nobody stops, nobody looks back. And if you fall, you yell and we'll get you. Move! They moved. Turned out, terror was an excellent motivator. The group stumbled through the smoke-choked corridors like a wounded organism, Brooklyn constantly counting heads, making sure nobody got left behind. Twice she had to double back for students who'd frozen up. Once she had to half-carry a girl who'd twisted her ankle. Time stopped meaning anything. Seconds or minutes or hours, who could tell when every breath might be your last? The science wing was, as Holland had accurately observed, very much on fire. Flames consumed the chemistry storage room, feeding on whatever volatile compounds hadn't already exploded. Heat rolled down the hallway in waves that made the air shimmer and dance. Brooklyn could feel her skin tightening, her lungs protesting with every breath. "We can't!" someone shouted behind her. "We'll die in there!" Brooklyn turned, ready to argue, ready to push, ready to do whatever it took to keep them moving. But then she saw it. Movement in one of the burning classrooms. People, students, trapped. Oh, come on. Holland, get them out the south exit. I'll catch up. Brooklyn, no, not a debate. Go! She didn't wait to see if he listened. Couldn't afford to. Instead, she did the single stupidest thing she'd done all day, which, considering the competition, was saying something, and ran straight into the burning science wing. Smoke immediately blinded her. Heat seared her exposed skin. Somewhere in the rational part of her brain that was currently screaming objections, Brooklyn acknowledged that this was a terrible idea. But that same rational part could also do math, and the math said there were at least 20 people in that burning section of building, and 20 lives were worth one incredibly stupid rescue attempt. She dropped low where the air was clearer, thank you, elementary school fire safety assemblies, and crawled forward, using the wall as a guide. Voices ahead, crying, shouting. She followed the sound like a lifeline. Found them in what used to be the advanced physics classroom. 24 students, and one very rattled-looking teacher pressed against the far wall, cut off from the exits by a wall of flame that had started in the hallway and spread like a living thing. Brooklyn recognized a few faces, kids from her grade, younger students, even that perpetually annoying sophomore who always tried to cheat off her during math tests. Brooklyn? The teacher, Miss Holbrook, looked like she couldn't decide if she was hallucinating. You can't be here. Yeah, well, neither can you, so let's fix that. Brooklyn scanned the room, mind racing. The windows were an option, but they were on the second floor, and she could see alien ships still circling outside like sharks. The door was blocked. That left. Her eyes landed on the emergency maintenance access panel in the corner. Every classroom had one, access to the crawl space between floors for repairs and wiring. Definitely not designed for evacuations. Definitely not up to fire code for this kind of use. Definitely their only option. Maintenance tunnel. She was already moving, yanking the panel open. The space beyond was dark and cramped, and probably filled with asbestos, but it wasn't actively on fire, which made it the best choice available. Everyone in, now! We can't fit. We'll fit or we'll die. Pick one. They fit. Barely. Brooklyn shoved, pushed, guided students into the narrow crawl space, counting heads, making sure nobody got left behind. The smaller kids went first, then the bigger ones, then Miss Holbrook, still protesting weakly. Last was Brooklyn herself, squeezing into the gap just as the classroom door exploded inward in a gout of flame that would have killed them all. "Move forward," she shouted into the darkness. "Follow the tunnel. It leads to the maintenance room by the gym." Crawling through a pitch-black, barely wide enough crawl space while a building burned around you and aliens destroyed your city was, Brooklyn decided, absolutely going on her list of experiences she never needed to have. Right up there with food poisoning and that time she'd accidentally walked into the boys' locker room. But they moved. Inch by agonizing inch, coughing and crying and terrified, but moving. Brooklyn brought up the rear, making sure nobody panicked and froze, keeping up a steady stream of encouragement that probably sounded more hysterical than inspiring. Almost there. Just keep going. Yeah, I know it smells like burning plastic. Try not to think about it. You're doing great. Someone ahead screamed. The tunnel shook. For one horrible moment, Brooklyn thought the whole structure was coming down on top of them. Then light. Blessed, beautiful light, as the maintenance room door opened and students started spilling out into the gym. Brooklyn hauled herself out last, gulping air that tasted like freedom and smoke in equal measure. Everyone okay? She did a quick count. 23 students, 1 teacher. All breathing. All alive. Someone hugged her. Then someone else. Then she was drowning in gratitude and tears and people who probably thought she'd just done something heroic instead of something profoundly idiotic. Okay, group hug later. Escaping now. Brooklyn extracted herself and pointed toward the gym's emergency exits. Fields that way. Shuttles should still be... Brooklyn! She knew that voice. Turned to find Holland sprinting across the gym, his face a mask of relief and fury. You absolute maniac. I thought you were... I'm fine. Got them all. Now let's... Danny's still inside. Brooklyn's world stopped. Danny. Her little brother. 12 years old, terrible at sports, brilliant at making her laugh, supposed to be in the music wing for band practice. The music wing that was now completely engulfed in flames. No! The word came out flat, emotionless. Where? Last anyone saw, he was trying to get to the band room lockers. Brooklyn, you can't. She was already running. Turned out, you could run faster when it was your little brother's life on the line. Brooklyn discovered this scientific fact as she sprinted back into the inferno that Ironwood High had become. Holland's protests fading behind her like background noise. The music wing occupied the oldest part of the building. Vintage architecture from the 50s. All wooden floors and high ceilings and absolutely zero modern fire suppression systems. Which meant it burned beautifully, enthusiastically, like it had been waiting decades for this exact opportunity. Danny! Brooklyn's voice cracked from smoke inhalation and sheer desperation. Heat pressed against her from all sides, turning the air into something solid and hostile. Danny, where are you? A cough, faint, to her left. She followed it like a beacon, ignoring the way flames licked at the walls, ignoring the ominous creaking overhead that suggested the ceiling had maybe 30 seconds before it decided gravity was an excellent idea. Found him wedged between an overturned piano and a pile of collapsed shelving, his face streaked with soot and tears. Relief hit her so hard she almost stumbled. Brooke? Danny's voice was small, scared, nothing like his usual annoying little brother swagger. I can't. My leg's stuck. I see it. She dropped beside him, assessing. A metal beam had him pinned, nothing broken from what she could tell, but definitely trapped. Brooklyn grabbed the beam and pulled. Nothing. Didn't budge. She tried again, putting her back into it, feeling muscles scream in protest. The beam shifted maybe an inch. Not enough. You need to leave, Danny said. And wow, her little brother was being brave and selfless, which meant things were really, truly terrible. Get out! Shut up! Brooklyn looked around frantically, mind racing through options. Lever. She needed a lever. Her eyes landed on a broken music stand, metal and sturdy. Not ideal, but nothing about this situation was ideal. She jammed the stand under the beam, using a chunk of concrete as a fulcrum, and threw all her weight onto the makeshift lever. Physics and desperation combined beautifully. The beam lifted just enough. Move! Now! Danny scrambled out, wincing but mobile. Brooklyn let the lever go and grabbed his hand, hauling them both toward where the exit should be, except the hallway had rearranged itself into a maze of fire and falling debris. Other way! She pivoted, pulling Danny with her. Overhead, the ceiling groaned its final warning. Run, Danny! Run! They ran. Behind them, the music wing collapsed with a sound like the world ending, sending a blast of superheated air and debris chasing them down the corridor. Brooklyn felt something clip her shoulder, hot and sharp, but didn't stop, couldn't stop, just kept running with Danny's hand clutched in hers until they burst out into the gym where Holland was waiting with wild eyes and an emergency medical kit. You're insane, Holland said, already checking them both for injuries. Completely, utterly insane. Yeah, well, Brooklyn coughed, tasted blood, decided to worry about that later. You knew that when you became my friend. Fair point. The gym's emergency exits led to the athletic field, where chaos reigned supreme. Emergency shuttles, human military looked like, were loading students in organized groups while soldiers in combat gear formed a perimeter. Overhead, alien ships still circled, but something had changed. Return fire now streaked upward from ground positions. humanity's experimental defense systems finally getting into the fight. Brooklyn made sure Danny got loaded onto a shuttle, made sure Holland was accounted for, made sure every face she recognized was moving toward safety. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline starting to wear off and leave behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made standing upright feel like an Olympic event. "You need medical attention." A soldier appeared at her elbow, voice professional but concerned. "That shoulder? It's fine. It's bleeding." Brooklyn looked down. Oh, so it was. Huh. Probably should have noticed that sooner. "Come on, kid. You did good. Let us take it from here." She let them guide her toward a medical shuttle, let them check her vitals and bandage burns she hadn't realized she'd gotten. Around her, Ironwood students were being triaged, treated, reunited with terrified parents. The death toll could have been catastrophic. The building had held nearly 800 students when the attack started. But it wasn't. Somehow, impossibly, most of them had made it out. Brooklyn closed her eyes and let unconsciousness take her. Waking up felt like swimming through concrete. Brooklyn's first coherent thought was that everything hurt. Her second was that hospital rooms still smelled the same, whether or not aliens had just attacked Earth. Antiseptic and sadness, with a hint of cafeteria food. "You're awake." Her mother's voice, thick with tears and relief. "Oh, thank God, you're awake." Brooklyn tried to sit up, immediately regretted it. "Danny?" "Fine, he's fine. Minor smoke inhalation, already discharged." Her mother, who Brooklyn had never seen cry, not even at Grandpa's funeral, was openly weeping. "You ridiculous, brave, stupid girl." "That's me." Brooklyn's voice came out scratchy, throat raw from smoke. "How long was I out?" 3 days. 3? What? "You had severe smoke inhalation, second-degree burns, a partially collapsed lung, and a concussion we're still not sure how you got." Her mother gripped her hand like letting go meant Brooklyn might disappear. "Doctor said you should be dead 5 times over." "Overachiever." Brooklyn tried for a smile, got a watery laugh in return. "Everyone else?" Ironwood High had an 89% survival rate, highest of any attack zone. Her mother's expression shifted to something Brooklyn couldn't quite read. "Because of you." Before Brooklyn could process that, Holland burst into the room like a tornado with bad hair, his cracked glasses replaced with new ones. "She's awake." "Oh, thank God. If you'd died, I would have had nobody to make fun of my coding, and, Brooke, you need to see this." He shoved a tablet in her face. Brooklyn blinked at the screen, trying to focus. It showed her running into the burning building, pulling students out one by one. The footage was shaky, phone camera quality, but unmistakable. "So?" She didn't understand why Holland looked so intense. "Someone filmed it. Big deal." "Brooklyn." Holland sat on the edge of her bed, careful of her injuries. "This video has 8 billion views. 8 billion. That's... Wait, how? It's not just on Earth." Holland pulled up another screen, this one showing what looked like alien text scrolling past too fast to read. "The Galactic Network picked it up. You're viral across 6 star systems." Brooklyn stared at the alien symbols, her smoke-damaged brain struggling to catch up. "I don't... Why would aliens care about..." "Because humans aren't supposed to do what you did." Holland's voice was gentle, like he was explaining something to a child. "We're supposed to be weak, fragile, prey species, according to most of the galaxy. But you ran into fire, multiple times, saved 28 people while buildings exploded around you." 28? Brooklyn's voice was small. "I saved 28 people?" 28 confirmed, probably more. and the galaxy is losing its collective minds trying to figure out if you're an anomaly or if all humans are secretly terrifying. Her mother stood, walked to the window. There's more. The Planetary Defense Council wants to see you. They've been waiting for you to wake up. Why? Because, sweetheart. Her mother turned back, face lined with worry and pride in equal measure. They want to make you Earth's first guardian. Brooklyn laughed, couldn't help it. Laughed until her ribs ached, and her mother looked concerned, and Holland had to remind her about the partially collapsed lung. Guardian, she wheezed. I just wanted to pass chemistry. Yeah, well, Holland grinned. Plot twist. The Planetary Defense Council turned out to be exactly as bureaucratic and terrifying as Brooklyn had imagined, which was saying something considering she'd imagined it run by robots in suits who fed on human suffering and bad coffee. Turned out, she wasn't far off. They met in a converted military bunker 200 feet underground, because apparently alien invasions had made surface-level government buildings seem quaintly optimistic. And the 11 council members looked at Brooklyn like she was simultaneously a miracle and a problem they hadn't figured out how to solve yet. Miss Brooklyn. The head counselor, a severe woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of voice that could cut glass, didn't smile. Do you understand why you're here? Because I failed to die on schedule? Her mother, sitting beside her, made a strangled sound. Holland, on her other side, coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. The counselor's expression didn't change. Because you've become a symbol, whether you intended to or not. They showed her more footage then, not just the school rescue, though that played on repeat across multiple screens, but the galactic response. Alien news networks debating human capabilities. Military analysts reviewing her movements frame by frame. Scientists arguing about human physiology and pain tolerance and pack-bonding instincts. One clip showed an insectoid alien, all chittering mandibles and compound eyes, saying something that the translator rendered as impossible. Prey species do not exhibit protective behavior at personal cost. This human is defective, or this footage is fraudulent. Rude, Brooklyn muttered. The galaxy, the counselor continued, has classified humanity as a potential threat. Not because we have superior technology, we don't. Not because we're physically stronger, we're not. But because your actions have suggested we possess something they don't understand. Irrational courage, self-sacrifice for strangers, a refusal to accept acceptable losses. You say that like it's weird. To most species, it is. The counselor finally sat, folding her hands on the table. Which brings us to the Guardian Initiative. Earth needs a representative in the Galactic Accord's Youth Defense Program. Someone to prove that humanity deserves protected status, rather than being classified as acceptable collateral in future conflicts. Brooklyn's stomach dropped. And you want me? The galaxy already knows you. Rejecting this position would be seen as weakness. So I don't actually have a choice. You always have a choice. A new voice, softer. Brooklyn turned to find a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who actually listened when people talked. I'm Dr. Miriam Hunt, xenopsychology specialist. And for what it's worth, I think this is a terrible burden to place on a 16-year-old who just survived a trauma. Dr. Hunt, the counselor's voice carried a warning, is right. Another voice, this one gravel-rough and military precise. A man in uniform stepped forward, maybe 50, with scars that suggested he'd seen actual combat. Lieutenant Kieran Oakes, I'll be your tactical advisor if you accept. But the doctor's got a point. You're a kid who did something brave under impossible circumstances. That doesn't automatically make you a diplomat. Brooklyn looked between them, then at the council, then at her mother's worried face. What happens if I say no? Earth's petition for protected status gets delayed, possibly denied. The counselor's tone made it clear she thought this was Brooklyn's fault, somehow. The Kel'un Dominion, the species that attacked us, will view it as confirmation that humans are weak. Future attacks become more likely. So, no pressure. Approximately 8 billion people worth of pressure, Holland whispered. But hey, who's counting? Brooklyn closed her eyes, breathed. Her ribs still ached from the collapsed lung. Her hands were bandaged from burns. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been chemistry homework, and now she was apparently responsible for Earth's entire diplomatic future. Okay, she said finally. What do I have to do? Training began immediately because apparently the galaxy didn't care about concepts like recovery time or psychological processing. Lieutenant Kieran turned out to be surprisingly decent for a military hardass. He treated Brooklyn like a person instead of a propaganda piece, which was refreshing after the Council's approach. Basic combat training first, he said, leading her through an obstacle course that made track practice look like a vacation. Not because we expect you to fight. You're a diplomat, not a soldier. But because you need to survive long enough to actually do diplomacy. Inspiring. Brooklyn hauled herself over a wall, muscles screaming. Really selling the job. You want inspiration? Watch motivational videos. You want to live? Keep climbing. They trained in Earth gravity, low gravity, high gravity, zero gravity, which made Brooklyn violently nauseous, but was apparently essential for space station life. Kieran drilled her on alien customs, species psychology, the complex web of alliances and grudges that made up galactic politics. The Kel'un Dominion, he said during one session, pulling up holographic displays of the species that had attacked Earth. Warrior culture, strength-based hierarchy, view most other species as either threats or resources. They attacked us because our expansion into space made us visible. And visibility plus perceived weakness equals prey. Brooklyn studied the hologram. The Kel'un looked vaguely reptilian, all scales and claws and predatory grace. And my running into a burning building changed that perception? Confused it. They're still debating whether you're an outlier or representative of the species. Kieran zoomed in on what looked like a military formation. Which is why Commander Havoc Orn issued a challenge. A what? The Trials of Burden. Ancient galactic tradition. 3 tests of courage, strength, and judgment. If you refuse, Earth's petition dies. If you fail, we remain classified as acceptable casualties. If you succeed, we get a voice in the Galactic Accord. And protected status. No more surprise invasions. Kieran's expression was grim. No pressure, right? Brooklyn laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. When are these trials? 6 weeks. You choose one. The Dominion chooses one. Neutral parties choose the third. He pulled up more data. We'll spend every day preparing. Combat drills, diplomatic protocols, alien psychology. Can I ask a question? Kieran paused. Always. Why do they care? The aliens, I mean. Why does one human doing something brave matter to species that have been spacefaring for thousands of years? For the first time since she'd met him, Kieran smiled. Actually smiled. Warm and genuine. Because most of them have forgotten what brave looks like. They've become civilized, efficient, logical. And you? You were none of those things. You were scared and stupid, and you did it anyway. That's not just brave, Brooklyn. That's human. And apparently, The galaxy finds that fascinating. Holland visited when he could, bringing news from Earth and terrible jokes that made Brooklyn's ribs hurt from laughing. Danny came once, hugged her so hard she thought her spine might crack, and made her promise to come home safe. "You're my annoying big sister," he said, voice muffled against her shoulder. "Nobody else is allowed to annoy me like you do." "Love you too, pest." But the person who surprised Brooklyn most was Dr. Miriam. The xenopsychologist showed up during Brooklyn's 4th week of training, found her in the rec room trying to learn the Kelun language, which sounded like gargling gravel while angry, and sat down without asking. "You're miserable," Dr. Miriam said. Brooklyn paused the language tutorial. "I'm training." "You're a 16-year-old girl being forced into a role she never asked for because adults failed to protect their planet." Dr. Miriam's voice was gentle but firm. "It's okay to be miserable about that." Something in Brooklyn's chest cracked. "Everyone's counting on me." "Which is unfair and wrong and also true." Dr. Miriam handed her a cup of something that smelled like chocolate. "You want to know what I told the council? I said they were making a mistake. You're not a soldier or a diplomat. You're a traumatized teenager who acted on instinct. Throwing you into galactic politics is like throwing someone who can swim into the ocean and expecting them to navigate to a specific island. So why are you here helping? Because they didn't listen to me? And because if this is happening anyway, I'd rather make sure you survive it with your humanity intact." Dr. Miriam smiled sadly. "The galaxy wants to study you like a specimen. I want to make sure you remember you're a person." Brooklyn sipped the chocolate. "It was good. Real. What if I fail?" "Then you fail. Earth finds another way. Life continues." Dr. Miriam's expression was fierce. "But Brooklyn, I've watched your training footage. I've seen your test scores. I've talked to Lieutenant Kieran. You're not going to fail." "How do you know?" "Because failing would require giving up, and you don't know how to do that." Bastion Station turned out to be both more and less impressive than Brooklyn had imagined. More impressive, it was a massive diplomatic hub the size of a small city, orbiting a neutral moon, hosting representatives from maybe 100 different species. The architecture alone was breathtaking, impossible geometries and gravity-defying structures that made her head hurt trying to understand them. Less impressive, it still had the universal quality of all government buildings everywhere, which was soul-crushing bureaucracy and, surprisingly, bad coffee. "Stay close," Lieutenant Kieran murmured as they entered the main diplomatic concourse. "And remember the protocols we practiced." Brooklyn nodded, trying not to stare at the sheer variety of alien life surrounding her. Beings made of crystalline structures that chimed when they moved, floating gas cloud entities that communicated through color shifts, a species that looked like ambulatory trees having a conversation with something that resembled a sentient lake. "Ambassador Ukolbeth of the Maharan Collective wishes to greet you," a translator device announced. Brooklyn turned to find an insectoid being approximately twice her height, with compound eyes that reflected fractured rainbows and mandibles that clicked in what the translator suggested was curiosity. "Guardian Brooklyn." Ukolbeth's translated voice was surprisingly gentle. "Your actions have caused much debate among my people." "Good debate or bad debate?" Brooklyn asked, then winced. Probably not diplomatic enough. But Ukolbeth's mandibles clicked faster. Laughter, according to the translator. "Confusing debate. We Maharan value collective survival above individual lives. Your species appears to value the opposite. You burned yourself pulling strangers from fire. This is irrational." "Maybe. Brooklyn met those compound eyes. But they weren't strangers to me after. Does that make sense? Ukolbeth was quiet for a long moment. Then, no. But perhaps that is why your species interests us. You make no sense, yet you survive. We shall watch your trials with great attention, small human. No pressure, Brooklyn muttered as Ukolbeth moved away. Dr. Miriam appeared at her elbow. That went well. Did it? I basically admitted humans are irrational. You were honest. In galactic politics, that's rarer than you'd think. Dr. Miriam guided her toward the residential section. Come on. Tomorrow you meet Commander Havicorn formally. Tonight, you rest. Brooklyn looked out at the vast diplomatic concourse, at the hundreds of species who would be watching her trials, judging not just her, but all of humanity based on her performance. No pressure at all. Commander Havicorn was, Brooklyn decided within 5 seconds of meeting him, exactly the kind of person who made her want to do something spectacularly stupid, just to prove a point. He stood maybe 8 feet tall, all muscle and scales, and controlled predatory grace. His eyes, cold and calculating, tracked her movements the way a hawk tracked a mouse. When he spoke, even through the translator, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. This is Earth's guardian? Havicorn's mandibles curved in what might have been a smile or a threat display. Hard to tell with alien facial expressions. A child who got lucky during a raid. Brooklyn felt Lieutenant Kieran tense beside her, felt Dr. Miriam's warning hand on her shoulder, felt her own temper, which had gotten her detention more times than she could count, start to simmer. Lucky, she repeated flatly. Right, because running into burning buildings 5 times was just excellent fortune. Desperation, instinct, not skill. Havicorn circled her like she was prey. The trials will prove whether humans deserve consideration or consumption. You know what? Brooklyn stepped forward, ignoring Kieran's sharp intake of breath. I accept your trials. All 3. And when I complete them, you're going to understand something important about humans. Which is, we're way too stubborn to know when we're supposed to quit. Havicorn's eyes gleamed. We shall see, little human. We shall see. The first trial, Brooklyn's choice, was the Gauntlet of Insight, a shifting maze that adapted to the participants' fears, designed to test mental fortitude and adaptability. Most species approach it analytically, Dr. Miriam explained the night before. They try to logic their way through. That's not going to work for you. Because I'm not logical? Because the maze feeds on logic. It wants you to think, to hesitate, to doubt. Dr. Miriam's expression was serious. Your advantage is that you don't think. You react. Trust your instincts, Brooklyn. They've kept you alive this far. The maze entrance looked innocuous. Just a doorway carved into crystalline walls. Brooklyn stood before it, aware of the hundreds of alien dignitaries watching from observation platforms. Somewhere up there, Holland was monitoring on vid-feed, and her mother was probably having a heart attack. No pressure. She stepped through. Immediately, the world shifted. She was back at Ironwood High, smoke choking the air, flames consuming the walls, students screaming, the smell of burning plastic and fear. Brooklyn's heart hammered. Not real, just a simulation. But her hands were shaking anyway, muscle memory kicking in, dragging her back to that day. Then she saw Danny, trapped again, screaming her name. Not real, she whispered. You're not real. But simulation, Danny looked so scared, so small, and every instinct in her body screamed to help him. No. Brooklyn closed her eyes, breathed. This was the test, to see if she'd freeze, if fear would paralyze her like it had paralyzed others. But fear had never stopped her before, had it? Fear just made her move faster. She opened her eyes and ran past Danny, kept running even as the simulation shifted, showing her mother dying, Earth burning, everyone she loved suffering while she stood helpless. Not real, she repeated like a mantra. Not real, not real, not real. The maze twisted, adapted, threw everything at her. But Brooklyn had learned something during the attack. Sometimes the only way through hell was straight ahead. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Just move. She burst out the other side in what felt like hours, but was apparently 12 minutes. Record time, according to the stunned officials. Havicorn's expression was unreadable. Interesting. Perhaps not entirely luck. Brooklyn was too busy trying not to throw up to care about his opinion. 6 days to prepare for the Dominion's trial. 6 days that Lieutenant Kieran filled with brutal combat training. The crucible of strength is exactly what it sounds like, Kieran said, demonstrating defensive positions. Single combat against a Kel-Un warrior. You cannot beat them on strength. So, what do I do? Survive, frustrate, outlast. Kieran moved through combinations, Brooklyn mirroring him. Kel-Un biology. They're faster and stronger than humans, but they overheat quickly. Their combat style is aggressive, overwhelming. They expect quick victories. So I make it slow. And painful for both of you. Kieran smiled grimly. Use the environment, stay mobile, make them chase you. And Brooklyn? Yeah? Don't try to be brave. Brave gets you killed. Be smart instead. The night before the combat trial, Brooklyn couldn't sleep. Found herself in the station's observation deck, staring at the stars and wondering what the hell she was doing. Can't sleep either? A voice behind her. Male, human, unfamiliar. Brooklyn turned to find a guy maybe early 20s, military uniform, tired eyes. Do I know you? Knox. Human pilot stationed here for the last 5 years. He moved to stand beside her at the viewport. Watched your first trial. Impressive. Thanks, I think. You think? Knox laughed, but it sounded bitter. I've been out here half a decade trying to prove humans deserve respect through military service. You show up and become the face of humanity in 3 weeks. Kind of annoying, actually. Brooklyn bristled. I didn't ask for this. I know. Knox's expression softened. That's probably why they picked you. The galaxy doesn't trust soldiers. We're expected to be dangerous. But a kid who ran into fire to save strangers? That's the kind of crazy they can't quite figure out. They stood in silence for a moment, watching distant ships move between stations. You're going to lose tomorrow, Knox said finally. The combat trial. Thulnak is their champion, undefeated in 60 matches. Optimistic. I like that in a person. I'm serious. You can't beat him. Knox turned to face her. But you don't have to. Just don't quit. That's what they're really testing. Whether you'll yield when things get hard. I don't really do quitting. Yeah. Knox smiled, genuine this time. I noticed. Good luck, Guardian. The combat arena was packed with representatives from maybe 50 species, all eager to watch the human get destroyed. Brooklyn stood in the center, wearing light armor that Kieran had insisted on, facing Thulnak across 20 meters of empty space. The Kel-Un champion was massive, easily 9 feet of scaled muscle and predatory confidence. Yield now, Thulnak growled, and I will make it quick. Counter-proposal, Brooklyn called back. You yield, and I won't make you look bad in front of your friends. Somewhere in the stands, she heard what might have been Holland choking on laughter. The match began. Thulnak moved like lightning, faster than Brooklyn had anticipated, faster than should have been possible for something his size. His first strike would have taken her head off if she hadn't dropped and rolled, pure track team reflexes saving her life. "Stand and fight, human!" "Pass." Brooklyn kept moving, using every bit of the arena, making him chase her. Each time he closed distance, she'd dodge, duck, use obstacles to break line of sight. It wasn't elegant, definitely wasn't brave, but it was working, sort of. She took hits anyway. Couldn't avoid them all. Each impact felt like being hit by a truck, sending her sprawling. But she kept getting up. That was the thing about track. You learned to push through pain, to ignore your body's screaming protests, and just keep moving. 15 minutes in, Thulnak was slowing. Overheating, just like Kieran had predicted. His strikes were still devastating but less precise. Brooklyn's entire body was one massive bruise, her armor cracked in a dozen places, blood running from a cut above her eye. But she was still standing. 20 minutes. Thulnak's breathing was labored now, his movements sluggish. Brooklyn was barely upright, held together by spite and stubbornness. "Why won't you stay down?" Thulnak roared, frustration finally cracking his warrior's composure. "Because staying down never solved anything," Brooklyn panted. "And I really hate losing." 30 minutes. The crowd had gone silent. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were fragile, weak, easy to break. But Brooklyn kept standing, kept moving, kept refusing to yield even when every rational instinct said she should. Finally, impossibly, Thulnak stopped, stared at her with something that might have been respect. "I yield," he said quietly. The arena erupted in chaos. Brooklyn collapsed, not quite believing what had just happened. Medical teams rushed in, both human and alien, checking her for injuries that were extensive but not life-threatening. Lieutenant Kieran reached her first. "You magnificent idiot. You actually did it." "Did what? Get pulverized?" "Earned their respect." Kieran helped her to her feet as the crowd roared approval. "Well done, Guardian." Brooklyn looked up to find Havicorn watching from the command platform, his expression unreadable. But he inclined his head, just slightly, in what might have been acknowledgement. 2 trials down, 1 to go. And Brooklyn had the horrible suspicion the third would be the hardest yet.